Black Ops 3 was a game revered by many, and a game that was the first entry into a sort of look in at a longer lifespan of the Call of Duty franchise and the games therein, supporting the game intermittently throughout the next 2.5 years after its launch. And surely, it had a lot of good things to it. Graphically, it held its own with the best of games in the franchise at the time, and mechanically, it was a stable performance that looked to push the boundaries of what we knew up until this point, and also some of the mechanics we even see to the day. However, one thing that came out of this year of Call of Duty was the seeming last hope of inclusion for Black Ops 3 with last generation console users, the ones who had not yet upgraded to their Xbox One, PS4, or PC standards that we see today. By the time of Black Ops 3's launch, it was just about the 2-year mark since PlayStation 4 and Xbox One had hit the market, depending on which platform you were on. But that said, that was also the third game to enter into that console lifecycle, as we saw that Ghost had not only Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, and PC support, but also Xbox One and PS4 support. Advanced Warfare the year following naturally had that, and so therefore Call of Duty looked to push away and leap into the next generation fully with Black Ops 3. Except, well, that didn't actually happen. Black Ops 3 did have some backwards generational support, if you would call it, and today we're going to be examining everything that came along with this and what may have been the saddest and most stripped project that we've ever seen Call of Duty produce. In a sort of retrospective manner, I'm going to give you guys a little rundown here of this if you remember it or didn't even know about it at all. So that said, let's jump into it. Before we get too far into the video itself, I want to give a huge thank you to my good friend Foxy Grandpa. His link will be down there in the description below. What you're seeing is gameplay from his version here of this, because I personally never had it. I abandoned the idea of Black Ops 3 on last generation as I had been up on those current generation consoles for a little bit of time, enough that it didn't seem necessary to go back. And plus, when you take a look at what we're going to detail here with this, you'll understand why you didn't want to go back. But a huge thank you to him for the gameplay that you're going to be seeing in the background here today with this video. But that said, Black Ops 3 on last generation Xbox 360 and PS3, this wasn't actually developed by Treyarch, or the vast majority was not. Of course, the basic building blocks of the game were ported over, but the game was primarily developed by Beenox and Mercenary Technologies. This allowed Treyarch to end up focusing on the current generation of support, that being Xbox One, PlayStation 4, and PC, but also still have this available for players that hadn't yet moved on to the next generation consoles, or current generation, I should say. While the basics and fundamentals of the game were at their core dictated by Treyarch, the assets were just ported over and sent over to the studios to work with the 360 and PlayStation 3 hardware. And perhaps one of the biggest limitations here was the hardware itself. As you'll see within this video, there is so much stuff that is not in the game itself, and some of the way just the core functionality works is completely different because 360 and PlayStation 3 just don't have as much capability or even memory to store those things that it's trying to run and play for the user. One of the biggest things that was missing here out of the game itself, the entirety of the campaign was nowhere to be found within the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 versions of Black Ops 3. Funnily enough, it seems like there actually was an attempt to make this happen and for it to be a part of the ship and launch build of the game, but it never came to fruition. A modder a couple of years back ended up finding out that there were some things in the cutscenes and also some playable files that were linked directly to single player, and you can see those images actually on screen right now, and you'll see why they were cut, but it was something that had just never made the cut of the game that launched with it. Additionally, things outside of that, not just campaign, things like Nightmares mode, which was obviously the campaign but with zombies associated with it as well, that was something that never shipped with the game at launch either. And naturally, if you're not going to finish the campaign because you either can't because of firmware and hardware limitations, or you didn't have enough time to polish it off, as it clearly looks, whichever one that turned out to be, you're not going to have a different alteration of that campaign introduced where it's not going to have the base of that. So that means that Black Ops 3 was simply only multiplayer and zombies only. One thing that is a tidbit of trivia is that on the box art itself, it says that internet is required, but there actually is local play available for Black Ops 3 on PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. But it is something, those are the only two modes that you had available. So right off the bat, you're already missing a big third of that game at launch, not counting the DLC stuff, but you'll see that that percentage starts to compound on top of everything else as we examine a little further. So you only had MP and zombies to start, but even that was a bare and stripped experience, something that just could not be made to work on last generation hardware and the available memory to use. For example, let's start out at the very beginning. Obviously, there was no beta here for this. Xbox One, PS4, and PC all ended up having a beta for Black Ops 3, but Xbox 360 and PS3 did not. Whenever it launched, we ended up getting things like no no paint shop, so you couldn't make your own custom camos, no gunsmith where you could make your own custom display weapons, no ground war where you could end up having the higher than regular player counts for everything that came along with that one. Nuketown was not a map that came along with this as well. That was a, I believe, pre-order bonus or something like that eventually came to everybody. There was no theater mode, again, a larger chunk of Black Ops 3 that allowed for a lot of cool creativity and a lot of cool things to come out of the gameplay itself, whether that be little machinimas that people put together, little skits, or different thumbnail images that players tried to get out of this if you're a content creator, or you just wanted to go back and check out some of your games that you ended up doing, see what you're doing right, see what you're doing wrong, anything in between. There was no theater mode to allow that to happen. The emblem editor also was something that was not in Black Ops 3's PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 version, something that you'd think is probably on a customization side a little bit more simple and a little bit more of a staple thing that you usually see in Call of Duty titles. There was no split screen for local or online play, again, something that is relatively normal for all Call of Duty titles. Blackjack the Specialist was not introduced, and you'll see that that also ties into the fact that, well, there was no black market or supply drops. And in one case, that is definitely something that sounds pretty awesome. No supply drops. You didn't have to worry about RNG or anything like that, or getting screwed over by anything the supply drop system may contain. But at the same time, that means you had absolutely no loot whatsoever in terms of new weapons, new customization like camos, taunts, uniforms, attachments, and so on and so forth. So that means that none of that stuff was available. And also, as a result of no black market, that means that there were no crypto keys or no COD points available as well. So another, even though some of that does seem good, another integral part of Black Ops 3 taken away. Crypto keys means that you couldn't earn anything, but again, there's no black market or anything to even earn it for. So I guess in the long run, it equals itself out. Outside of that, though, there were no events that we ended up seeing throughout PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and PC, like things like Days of Summer or the Days of the Undead or the winter-themed event where we got Redwood Snow and things like that. None of that stuff happened either. When it comes down to it, Black Ops 3 only had supported up to DLC 1 to begin with, meaning all multiplayer maps, and then DLC 1 of Horizon Drac for zombies was the only stuff that was added post-launch to the game. Everything else just could not work or wasn't able to have any consideration for it to be even possible. So in that regard, well, of course, those things like Days of Summer and the winter event wouldn't be coming because that was a year and 2 years after the launch of Black Ops 3. Other additional things that are just kind of quirky is that, well, on the 360 and PlayStation 3 versions, you could not see your lower body. Whenever you went into any match within Black Ops 3 on current generation consoles, that's something you could end up looking down and seeing your feet, but it would not render in anything underneath your body on PlayStation 3 or Xbox 360. As for zombies, well, that again is kind of the same similar situation. Again, up until DLC 1, that was the only support that we had here for this, but there were other things that were just absolutely weird to begin with. The gibbing of zombies was a big thing within Black Ops 3 that was a big attention grabber for those that paid attention to the details, but the only things that would gib in zombies on 360 and PlayStation 3 were the heads of zombies when you got headshots. Additionally, another interesting quirky thing is that Jack Vincent was the only character on the main menus. None of the other ones would come in at all. But outside of that, the core gameplay itself really was the biggest part that you'd probably notice. Naturally, the graphics, because you don't have as hardworking of consoles as 360s and PlayStation 3 as compared to what the current generation can do, everything graphically is, well, pretty dumbed down. It's pretty ugly if you compare it to Black Ops 3 on the current generation systems, but it is something that on top of not only the graphical differences, the game itself primarily was locked at 30 frames per second. There is something in the multiplayer that I heard where it is 30 to 60, but it's variable, but that also doesn't mean that you're ever going to get a constant 60. It's not locked at 60 like it is in other titles at launch. Instead, 30 is probably more closer to what you'd see on a relatively regular basis. The main menus were all locked at 30, and a lot of menus themselves were actually static so that they didn't really change or cause too much of an issue for the hardware trying to do more than it was supposed to. So the 30 FPS was definitely something you would definitely notice whenever you went from 360 to, say, Xbox One or PlayStation 3 to PlayStation 4. So the game itself was drastically different from the content that it gave to the actual play that it supported. And the craziest part out of all of this was that, well, it still launched at $50, only a $10 discount from what is normally offered for whenever the game launches on full current generation support. That means you're paying only $10 less for half the frame rate, half the graphical textures, honestly probably a little less than the full game itself whenever you added in all the DLC contents and all that kind of stuff that came along throughout the years of support of Black Ops 3, but you're only paying $10 less for a far less powerful version of the game. So not sure if I'd say $10 off justifies all of that, but looking back, it's certainly crazy to think about how different it was. And I know that it was supposed to be to include all players and that generational gap still wasn't as far a disconnect that it was absolutely useless maybe. And for a time, the population on it actually wasn't terrible. I couldn't tell you going back now what it would be like, but back then it really wasn't a terrible player base, but the actual game itself was something that was, well, less than ideal. So that's been a little retrospective look here at this. What are your thoughts here on this? Did you remember seeing this back in the day in the prime of Black Ops 3? Is it something that you're kind of bummed this had to be a thing? Do you think that it should have been a thing in the first place? Whatever it may be, feel free to let me know your thoughts down in the comment section down below. I know there are a bunch of memes that came here out of this 360 and PlayStation 3 version, so feel free to let me know your thoughts on any of your favorites of that as well. But hopefully enjoyed the video, a little retrospective look back at where Black Ops 3 had a lesser known counterpart, but hopefully enjoyed. And if you did, make sure you drop a like down below. If you're also new to the channel and want to stay up to date with all things Black Ops 4, Black Ops 3, any retrospective looks like this, and anything upcoming from Modern Warfare, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss a single thing regarding any updates, news, information, tips, tricks, all that good stuff. We got you covered with all that. So if any of it interests you, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a single thing. And if you guys also want to follow me over on Twitter and Instagram, those are the best place to get connected outside of YouTube. Practically live on both those. So if you guys want to start up a conversation, ask me a question, whatever it may be, that link is down there in the description below. But let's end out with. Thank you guys all so much for watching. My name is Espresso. I'll see you guys later. Take care and peace.